You know, I really love Old Testament year. And it's not just that that's when I like to teach Institute, but it's how during my week people actually are interested in the Old Testament. So one of my grandkids, who's 16 years old, had a question for me this week about Old Testament. And I was getting my annual physical, and my doctor asked me questions about Old Testament. So it's like, boy, this is the best year ever. I really love this year. Okay, so last week, as you remember, those who were here and those who watched online, we talked about Genesis chapter 15 and the what we call the Abrahamic covenant, but it's specifically the moment when they have the covenant made between the pieces is the language that's used for Genesis 15. And to help members of the church understand that better, about 20 years ago, my brother and I made a handout. You will get this in the email today or tomorrow, if you have signed on to the email list, which is by the door to come out. So if you haven't been receiving any emails, then you need to make sure and sign up. But that will be coming in email. Each week I like to talk about a couple of books, one or two at least. This one is old. I mean, it's Truman Madsen, right? So it's been a while, but this is entitled Covenant and Chosenness in Judaism and Mormonism. So it's looking at the whole idea of a special relationship with God because you are in a covenant with Him. And it has like 20 different papers in it. It's one of those that you can read 6 pages and be done at a time. So that's one. This one is probably a little more difficult to approach, simply because it's written by someone who isn't LDS. It's entitled The Woman Who Named God. That's talking about Hagar. You may not know that about Hagar. Abraham's Dilemma and the Birth of Three Faiths. And this week and next week, we'll be talking about how the story of Hagar and Ishmael is the beginning of the religion of Islam. Now, it doesn't happen at the time of Hagar and Ishmael. Muhammad isn't born until the 7th century AD. But the whole mythology, the history, the symbolism in the story is taken from the story of Hagar and Ishmael. And so those are two. If someone wants to check them out and take them home, you may do that by signing on this paper. And I'm going to hand that to Jennifer. Sorry, have to move your desk. There you go. So if anyone wants either of those, The Woman Who Named God or Covenant and Chosenness, and we'll just keep them passing around. You can't get these at the Salem Library. You know, just very few things that I want do they have at the Salem Library. So that's just my life. So last week then we talked about passing between the pieces. This is what you may do to me, and more so if I don't keep my covenant with you. So today we're going to actually start by looking at 2 other stories in the Old Testament where this ritual is a part of the story, and that you have probably read right past and not noticed it. And so that's why I'm taking the time to do this. So Samuel, the last of the last of the judges, Israel, the 12, can't really even call them the 12 tribes. There was a confederation where they kind of, during the book of Judges, where they kind of were together. But you'll also see times when they massacre each other. So the book of Judges is like the dark ages of the Old Testament. And so at the end of the book of Judges, you get the rise of Samuel. His mother Hannah goes to the tabernacle to pray, and she is given the son that she prays for. So the people of Israel want a king to unite them and lead them in battle. And a guy is out farming and loses his donkeys. And so he and his servant decide that the best thing to do is go find the man of God. It's one of the names for a prophet in the Old Testament, is man of God. And let's go find the man of God and ask him where the donkeys are. That's quite literally how you would use a prophet. And you would pay him for his efforts, by the way. And so when they go to the man of God, it's Samuel, he recognizes that Saul is the man that God has chosen to be the next king, to be the king. This is the first king of Israel. And 3 times Samuel will have the children of Israel gather together and support Saul as king. So there's at least 3 different coronations. And the funnest for me is one in which they can't find Saul. He's not sold on this idea at all. He does not want to be the king. He happens to be someone they want as the king because he's head and shoulders taller than everybody else. So kind of like Brother Huff. And that makes for a good king because you're clearly able to be a warrior. And that's what they're looking for, is a great warrior. Unfortunately, Saul doesn't want the job, so he has hidden so no one can find him for coronation. Do we have any idea what the beeping is?
I think it's on the computer.
What?
I think it's on the computer.
Really? It's not doing anything. Okay.
Yeah.
We'll let it go then. So he has hidden behind the stuff. And I realized, I didn't realize that the stuff is a biblical term. He's over in the baggage. He's hiding, and they bring him out.
Could you try again?
I will try again. So, Samuel called all the people together in 1 Samuel chapter 10 and says, See you him whom the Lord hath chosen? There is none like him among all the people. And that's when he says, see, he's head and shoulders taller. And so all the people shout and say, first time, God save the king. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom and wrote it in a book and laid it up before the Lord. Oh, it is the notifications coming in on this computer.
Oh, maybe you can just mute, like turn the sound, like mute on the computer.
To do that, I'd have to.
I'm texting him. Don't worry. He's
okay, because I would have to escape from this and load it up
oh,
again.
there's not just a mute button, like turn the sound off on the little on the top.
There is a get quieter button. F2.
Type it. Yeah.
Do I need to hold down FN button first?
No, I don't know. Just have to texting him.
Okay, we'll see how it goes. I'll hit it again if we need to. When it says laid it up before the Lord, that means it's in the tabernacle that they have at the center of the community, right? And then Samuel sent everybody away, and Saul went home. Everybody just goes home, and a band of men went with him. You'll notice that each of the kings has a group of soldiers called their mighty men who surround them and stay with them, protect him and fight with him. You'll hear about David and his mighty men. So there's a group who have self-chosen to be part of his entourage. But the children of Belial said, how can this man save us? And they despised him and brought him no presents. Now, if you're invited to the coronation of the king, you better bring him tribute. It is a real offense. Probably a hanging offense to be called to the coronation of the king and not bring him a present. But Saul doesn't say anything about it. He lets it go. He's not going to push it. And then in the very next chapter, in the very next verse, we get the first test of Saul's kingship. Will the people come together and fight to protect each other? That's the big question. So Nachash the Ammonite came and camped against the city of Jabesh Gilead. If you want to find that on a map, it's in the Transjordan. That means east of the Jordan, near what is now Amman, Jordan. Okay? And Nachash means snake. So this guy is named Snakehead or something like that. You can just imagine him as a warrior coming out of Mad Max. Okay? And all the men of Jabesh said to Nachash, cut a covenant with us, and we will serve you. They don't want to die, and they don't want to go to battle. So they want to make some kind of treaty, and they are willing to be his slaves if he will just leave them alive. Tough conditions, dark ages. So Nachash the Ammonite answered, sure, on this condition will I cut a covenant with you. I will thrust out all of your right eyes. That's what we're going to cut. And then we'll lay those for a reproach upon all of Israel. Probably he will send some eyes to each of the other tribes. Right? I mean, it's pretty graphic in the Old Testament. And the elders of Jabesh, this is what I love about the Old Testament, they get together and say, you know, give us a week. We're going to send and see if we can get anybody else on our side. And if we can't get anybody to come and help fight with us, then okay, we'll come out to you. You can have our right eyes. So, the messengers came to Gibeah, which is where Saul is, and told the tidings in the ears of the people. And all the people lifted up their voices and wept, because nobody wants to go to war. And Saul came out after the herd in the field. He has been out with his herd. You don't usually think of the king plowing his own land and shepherding his own animals, but that's exactly what's going on here. And Saul says, so what's the problem here? And they told him the tidings from Jabesh. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard that, and he was ticked. So he took his yoke of oxen. Now you can just compare a yoke of oxen to, I don't know, 2 Mercedes that you own. Oxen are extremely expensive animals. And he hewed them in pieces and sent pieces of his oxen throughout the coasts of Israel with messengers, saying, whoso cometh not forth after Saul and Samuel, this is what I'm going to do to your oxen. So it's a little bit merciful, because he's not going to do it to them, right? He's not going to kill people who don't come. He's just going to kill their oxen, which of course means they can't plow, and their cows won't be impregnated. It's a disaster either way. And the fear of the Lord fell upon the people, and they all came, because they didn't want that. So when he numbers all the Israelites who show up, there are 300,000 men. And from the tribe of Judah, 30,000 alone. And they said to the messengers, okay, you can go back and tell the men of Jabesh Gilead, tomorrow, when the sun is hot, we will be there. And so the messengers are thrilled, and they go home and tell the men of Jabesh tomorrow. Actually, they tell the men of Jabesh, and the men of Jabesh say to Nachash, tomorrow, when the sun is hot, we will come out to you, and you can cut out our right eyes. And so on the morrow, Saul put the people in 3 different companies, and they came in the midst of the host in the morning watch, and the Ammonites were not ready for an attack, and they killed them in the heat of the day, and any that remained were scattered, so that not even 2 were left together. This is the big test. Would Israel show up to defend another tribe? And so at that point, the people said to Samuel, where are those guys? Oh, those men of Belial. You may not know that name. Belial means people who have no value. They're just, it's not like these were rich tribesmen who were saying we won't support him. They're just men with no character. Who were those guys that said, can Saul reign over us? Go get them, and we will put them to death. Because they didn't support the king. And Saul said, no. We're not going to put any Israelites to death today, because the Lord hath wrought salvation for Israel. He said, and so Samuel says, let's go to Gilgal and renew the covenant. Renew the kingdom. Crown Saul again. And so the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul the king, and they sacrificed peace offerings before the Lord, and everyone rejoices greatly, which means they ate the meat. Rejoicing greatly means offering sacrifice and then having a big party, eating red meat. You only would eat red meat in ancient days if you had been to the temple or the tabernacle. Red meat is extremely expensive. And so anytime that you rejoice before the Lord and are eating red meat, it's because you've been to the temple and have offered some sacrifice. Now here, they didn't go to where the temple was. It's probably over at Shiloh. But they went to another important place. And Gilgal, if you were to look at the maps and I didn't put a map in here, but if you look at the maps in the back of your book, you'll find that Gilgal is right over near Jericho. Just on the west side of the Jordan River, right where they crossed the Jordan River at the end of the Exodus. And it's an important location because that is where all of the men were circumcised. Apparently, during the 40 years of the Exodus, they didn't perform circumcisions. May have been because of the uncertain conditions, we don't know why. But when they enter into the promised land that God promised them, then they all got circumcised. Now, I don't know if you recognize what incredible faith that took. You're entering into a foreign land and hoping to obtain that land, and the first thing you do is incapacitate all the men, which doesn't make any sense. But Gilgal, Gil means circle. Gilgal means circle, circle. And they set up standing stones in a circle. If you've ever been to England to see any of those rings of standing stones, or Sweden, I found them there, these are holy sites to the people who built them. And you can just see what the men did there, right? With those standing stones, I hope you can see this is meant to be a phallic symbol. And it is God who gives them fertility. Now, this is not symbolism we use anymore, but it's all through the Old Testament. And if you fail to see that, you don't understand how they saw the covenant between God and man of he will give us land, here's the promised land, and he will give us seed. We'll have kids. And our animals will have children. So this is Gilgal, and there are still ruins of the circles there to this day. So that's the first big test. And you see how he cut up an animal, and everybody gets pieces of this animal, and they're told, do what you said you'd do, or your oxen will be carcasses on the ground. Now we're going to Jeremiah. And you know the situation of Israel in the book of Jeremiah. Actually, I shouldn't say Israel. The country of Judah. Because the land of the northern tribe of Israel has been gone 100 years. They were conquered by the Assyrians, and the 10 tribes of Israel have already been taken into captivity. So at the time of Jeremiah, which is at the exact same time as the Book of Mormon opens with Lehi, okay, he's a contemporary. The Babylonians are now the enemy. The Babylonians have invaded the land. They are overlords in the land, like Germans in Holland or France or Norway. Take your pick. Poland, wherever. There's an occupying force in your country for 10 years before the Book of Mormon opens. And yet, Laman and Onan will say, everything's fine. Conditions are great. The economy is good. And you just have to wonder, what are they seeing? Right? I mean, there's Babylonian soldiers on the corners in the city. So, Zedekiah, who is the king here in Jeremiah chapter 34, same Zedekiah that's king when the Book of Mormon opens, right? Zedekiah is not the actual descendant of Solomon and David, who should be on the throne. Zedekiah is a puppet put in a position of power by the Babylonians. He's like the Vichy government in France. Meanwhile, the guy who should have been king has been blinded and hauled off to Babylon. So everything's fine, right? So at that point in time, Zedekiah and his supporters decide that they're going to throw off the chains of Babylon. They're going to kick out the oppressor. And this is the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord after King Zedekiah cut a covenant with all the people who were in Jerusalem to proclaim liberty. So they decided that they would get together, the king and all the princes, and they cut up an animal and renew their covenant with God by saying, we're going to set all our prisoners free and hope that you, in return, will set us free. That's the terms of the covenant that they make. And so every man would let his manservant. Now, you need to know, every time it says servant, you should read slave. These are not paid laborers, okay? This is not like a butler that you pay. These are slaves. And if they are Hebrews, which is the case here, these are all Hebrew slaves, they're probably in slavery because they got in debt. It's debt slavery, which has always been around. And so if you get in debt, you have to go and work off your debts. So we're going to let every man his manservant, and being a Hebrew, now they're not going to set foreign slaves free. That's just a little too far, right? You'd have to cook your own food. But any of the maidservants as well, as long as they're Hebrews, they would go free, that none of them should be slaves to any of the other Jews. This is, by the way, the painting of Jeremiah from the Sistine Chapel. Now, when the princes, and you might turn to Jeremiah 34 to read along with this, when all the princes and all the people which had entered into the covenant heard that everyone should let his manservant and maidservants go free, that none of them should serve them anymore, they obeyed, and they let all their Jewish slaves go free. But afterward they turned. Now, do you remember what turned means? Remember when we were walking eastward out of the temple? You're supposed to turn around and come back, right? And repent. Well, they've already repented. They've made the covenant. Now they turn again. So what direction are they headed? East. Like Cain. Okay? They repented of their repentance. And they caused their servants and handmaids, whom they had set free, to come back and put them back in subjection. So they probably had a day off. Therefore, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah, saying, "Thus saith the Lord God of Israel." Do you guys remember when I made a covenant with your fathers in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, where they were slaves? Do you remember the law that I gave you, that at the end of every 7 years, you should let any slave that you have who is a Hebrew go free, regardless of whether he's paid his debt or not? At the end of 7 years, that's in the sabbatical year. Maybe he only became a slave in the 5th year and he's only worked for you 1 year. Doesn't matter. In the 7th year, which is the sabbatical year, you set the prisoners free. Do you understand the language used by universities? You go on a sabbatical means you're a slave of the university and you get a year off. That's the theory behind it. So the deal was that you would let them go. All the slaves in the 7th year. But no one listened to me. No one obeyed. And now you had turned, you'd repented from the deeds of your fathers, you're headed back into my presence, and had done right in my sight in proclaiming liberty, every man to his neighbor. And you had cut a covenant before me in the house which is called by my name. But then you turned again, turned their back on God, and polluted my name, and caused everyone his slaves, male and female, whom you'd set at liberty, you brought them back into subjection. Therefore, thus saith the Lord. You have to worry about what God might say to you at this moment. Because you have not hearkened unto me in proclaiming liberty, everyone to his brother, every man to his neighbor, behold, I'll proclaim a liberty for you. You are free to experience the sword and pestilence and famine. Those are the 3 covenant curses that you are free to experience if you don't keep your covenant with God. Famine, pestilence, and the sword. Watch for those. You're going to see them all the time in Deuteronomy. You're going to see them all the time in the writings of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and throughout the Book of Mormon. I will make you to be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. That's what you're free to do. Become slaves yourselves. See how he takes how you act and say, is that what you want? okay, you can be slaves, just like you brought everybody into captivity. You can now be slaves. And I will give the men who transgressed my covenant, who have not performed the words of the covenant which they made before me when they cut the calf in two and passed between the parts thereof. The princes of Judah, the princes of Jerusalem, the eunuchs, that means all of the high order government officials, the priests, and all the people of the land. This means every class of people marched between the pieces of these calves at the temple. And I will give them into the hand of their enemies, and into the hands of them that seek their lives, and their dead bodies will be meat to the fowls of heaven and the beasts of the earth. Can you just see the carcasses laying on the ground in Genesis 15? And the birds are coming down on the carcasses in the night before the smoking lamp and burning torch pass between the pieces. This is a reenactment of that moment when God said, the Lord says, you don't want what I promised you? You're going to be hypocrites? Okay. Then your carcasses will lay on the ground. And your land will be desolate, meaning there's not going to be any living people in it. So in the Book of Mormon, there's this moment in the story when the people they're trying to find a way back home, and they're kind of lost in the wilderness. This happens often. And they come across a city where there's dead bones everywhere, the remnants of the Jaredite civilization. And everybody's dead. And it's probably been hundreds of years. But they look at the place and they say, wow. They name it the city of desolation, because that's the term, the covenant name for what you get if you don't keep your covenants. You will be made desolate. So they're saying, wow, we know what happened to these people. They were wicked. God cut them off, and they're all gone. And when you go and read about the Jaredites, right, in the book of Ether, where they can't even make peace when there's only two of them left, you want to say, these people are insane. And that's exactly right. Blood, anger, and bloodthirst has taken over. But you'll watch for famine, pestilence, and the sword. When you are righteous, you will prosper. When you are wicked, you will be cut off. Right? You've heard that all the time in the Book of Mormon. What we don't realize is they're talking about the covenant with God. And those are the terms of the covenant. And they have cut a covenant with God at some time in their past. Now, this is not an unusual thing to do in the Middle East at the time. This is called a suzerain vassal treaty. And all of the nations around Israel and Judah are making the same type of oath or promise. A feudal lord would promise, that's a suzerain. They like to use big words in academic stuff, right? So you need to learn the definitions of the words. So the feudal lord promises land and seed to plant in the land to any vassal who pledges his fidelity and fealty to the Lord. That means when that lord calls him to come to battle, think of Saul, he shows up. And if he's willing to show up, then he can keep the piece of land that his lord has offered him. This is called the feudal system. And it started thousands of years BC and continued for 1,000 years AD. I mean, Europe was essentially a feudal system until the 1800s. We forget how recent this kind of political system is, where, I don't know how many of you have ever been to Germany, but every time that you go around a corner, there's another castle. When you go on the Rhine, for example, you're like, castle, 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 castle. And each of those is a lord, and he owns as much land as he can protect. And he's going to give people the right to plant on that land. And in the Rhine Valley, you know, they're planting grapes. The whole place is just filled with beautiful vineyards. But if he calls you to battle against whoever's trying to take the Rhine from you, now this is World War I and World War II, because the Germans and the French are still fighting over the Rhine River. It boggles the mind how recent this all is. So, the treaties were made in antiquity by cutting up an animal, and a blood oath is made. Now, that promise would be in perpetuity, meaning a man's sons would inherit the same piece of land if they are also faithful to the Lord that their dad had agreed to work with. And that's everywhere. The differences between the different nations is not even the wording of the ritual or the actions of the ritual, it's just which animals you're cutting up. Here's some documents. Israelite neighbors. These are documents from people living around the land of Israel. This head is not the head of a ram, it is the head of this man, Matilu. Just as this ram's head is torn off, so will the head of Matilu be torn off if he breaks his covenant. Here's another one. Abiel swore an oath to Yarilim and cut the neck of a lamb, saying, if I take back what I have given you, then this is what can happen to me. See the language? It's the same thing. Everybody's doing this, and it's political, it's economic, and it's religious. It's all of that. Any of those kinds of contracts, they're all done this way. And the land that you get would be marked with stones that mark the corners of your land. This is a Mesopotamian stone, and you can see that there's a suzerain. He's the bigger guy. If you have more power, you are depicted larger in size. Okay? And his vassal. And the terms of the agreement are written there in cuneiform. And the witnesses are the sun and the moon. And you'll notice that the sun has wings. That is a very typical depiction of the sun in the Middle East. So when you get to the book of Malachi, and it talks about how the Son of Righteousness will rise with healing in his wings, this is the imagery it's referring back to. I mean, how would the sun stay up there if it doesn't have wings? Okay. Here's another one. Again in cuneiform. Note the upraised arms, the size difference between the little vassals and the big suzerain, and the sun and moon and stars there above the big guy, again, are witnesses. Here's another one. Note sun, moon, and stars at the top as witnesses. Now, when you get to the book of Isaiah, and he pronounces that he's going to call the nation of Israel into court, and the witnesses in the court will be the sun and the moon and the stars. Have they kept their covenant with God? Of course, you know, Israel's going down in the time of Isaiah, right? The 10 tribes are going to be taken into captivity. But that's how the book opens, is a court scene, and the witnesses are the sun, the moon, and the stars. This is everybody using this symbolism. And of course, you know, those are carved on the outside of the Salt Lake Temple. And they're always there to see what you're doing. Right? Every day the sun's there, it sees what you're doing. You can't hide. Notice also all these altars, that's I guess you can't call them concentric, they're squares. But those carved things are altars, and they use a variety of different animals on those altars. Now we're going to skip through what we talked about last week. I just wanted you to get a feeling for the civilization that Abraham is living in and how he knew what to do when God says, well, let's make a covenant. He knows, you cut up the animals, you walk between them. So the next chapter we look at in terms of the covenant, because that's what we've been discussing, is chapter 17, which usually doesn't get talked about much at church. When I taught seminary, early morning seminary, one of the things that they would remind seminary teachers every year when you had Old Testament is be sure that you talk to the parents of your students so that the parents tell their kids what circumcision is, because you don't want to be telling a bunch of teenagers, boys and girls, in the same room what circumcision is. The kids should know that before they get to class, just because. So, in chapter 17 of Genesis, circumcision is the token or sign of the covenant. Now remember, we talked about the bow in the heavens at the time of Noah as the token or sign of the covenant. This is language that's used about covenant making. There are always tokens and signs associated with it to help you remember what you said you'd do. And this token or sign is cut right into the organ through which men beget seed, which is the promise of the covenant. So that when they look upon it, and that would be several times a day, right? They're reminded that they made covenants and they should stay within the bounds the Lord has set, right? Symbolically, and this is interesting with the rabbis, circumcision, according to the rabbis, engraves God's name on his people. He has written his name upon you. And to engrave means to cut into metal, right? That's engraving. The terms of the covenant are, I will be your God, you will be my people. So you have my name on you. Now it's pretty vivid when you are serving in God's army and are expected to be faithful to him and go out to war as he calls you to war, when you are wearing a little name tag that is engraved. I love that it's engraved, right? On you. You are wearing his name. And yet we don't think about it.
Kind of like the garments, only
Right, with tokens and signs
easier for females.
to remind you. But putting that badge on every day as a missionary reminds you that, okay, I'm part of God's army, and I need to do what I said I would do. And I'm under covenant during that time period. And he promises me that he'll help me in exchange. So here's the word for token. This is from Genesis 17. This is my covenant, which ye shall keep or guard. This covenant between me and you and your seed after you. Every man-child among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that will be a token of the covenant betwixt me and you. Now the word token is oat. And the plural is otot. It's a feminine plural, a word, which in this case I think is interesting. It begins with aleph, that's the one on the right, and it ends with the tav, and the letter in the middle is the vav, which is the Hebrew word for and. So what you're seeing there in the word token is aleph and tav, or in Greek, alpha and omega, the first and the last. He is the sign. And you think about the signs that are engraven upon him as he fulfilled the promise of the covenant that he would die in our place. It's only when you really spend the time figuring out the language and symbolism in the Old Testament that you begin to go, oh wow, I've heard about that my whole life, but now I see there's another meaning to it. This has more meaning to me now. Now, along with getting signs and tokens, often when you covenant, there's a new name. And in chapter 17, Abram and Sarai are given new names. They become Abraham and Sarah. Now, this is a little piece of mystical Judaism, which I didn't know even existed until I started studying it. That there are hidden mysteries and ideas and things going on in the text that you're just not noticing at all. And part of it is that every letter is also a number. So there's math going on all the way through the Old Testament. Now, if math is not your thing, okay, you don't have to go here. But I was a math tutor, and I have kids who are math people. So when I learned that math is an essential piece of Hebrew, it was like, oh, that's interesting. So if you were to look at the name of the Lord, Jehovah, it's right up there in the middle. And it's spelled Yud, He, Vav, He. And the values of each of those letters are written below them. He is 5, there's 2 of those. Vav, in the middle, it's the number 6, but it's also the word for and. And Yud is 10. So this is actually, could be read as a math addition problem. 5 plus 5 equals 10. And what the rabbis say is that in changing Abram's name, they're going to take a Yud and split it into the 2 He's. Take a 10 and split it into the 2 5s that it's made out of. They're going to take the Yud from Sarai, because there's a Yud in her name. It ends in a Yud. So interestingly, the 10 comes from Sarai. And it's divided into two heys, and each of them get a hey in their name when their name is changed. So Sarai loses the 10, but she gains a 5. She is now Sarah. Abram gets a hey added. He is now Abraham. And together, Sarah and Abraham make the Yud, which is the first letter in the name of Jehovah. Now, this is weird, right? You don't do this in English. But when you realize that there might be another level of meaning that you have never even considered, it opens up all kinds of possibilities of what is being said. And I know that's kind of weird, but that's what I do for fun. It's called gematria, if you want to look it up. Okay, now, oops, there we go. Now we're going to look at a different, okay, let me find, where is my, it's tiny. Another PowerPoint, good. And this one, as I was thinking this week, how can I help the students understand how all-pervasive covenant language is in the Old Testament? You have this idea of if you keep the covenant that you've cut with me, and they would be cutting with a two-edged sword, straight out of Isaiah, right? The two-edged sword. Or the book of Revelation, when Jehovah comes to call his army together in chapter 19. He calls all these men to come to battle, and all the enemy's carcasses are going to lay on the ground, and the birds of heaven are going to come down and eat all of the enemies. See where that's coming from? That's straight out of the Old Testament. When Jehovah comes wearing red on the white horse, he has a two-edged sword coming out of his mouth. And with that rod of iron, he will smite the nations. The question is, which side of the sword are you on? That's the moment of judgment. Did you cut covenant with God and keep that covenant? Or are you going to be cut off because you were a hypocrite? That's this language. So, one side of the sword is cursing, the other side is blessing. We'll get to this a lot in the book of Deuteronomy. But I made a list and just started writing down words, and they're not parallel to each other. I was just making a list. But on the left-hand side here are the types of words that are going to be used through all of our scriptures, not just the Old Testament, through all of our scriptures, when it's talking about someone making the wrong choice. On the right-hand side is your list of what the blessings are that are promised if you keep your covenant. And you can see that some of them are really weird, but people, when they're naked, that was typical of slaves. So when Isaiah or Jeremiah walks around naked, and all the people are saying, oh, put some clothes on, what he's saying is, you're going into captivity. These object lessons all through the scriptures are coming back to this language carcasses laying on the ground, the wild beasts getting to eat you, the grasshoppers eating your crops. Yeah. Anybody have grasshoppers 2 years ago? They wiped out every single flower in my yard.
Oh.
They ate the roses, not the leaves, the flowers. I was so ticked. We went out with a vacuum, our shop vac, and would vacuum up the grasshoppers. We understand pestilence. Here's some other ones.
Yeah.
You see, if you're promised seed, then if you're barren, that must be that you are cursed. Now, it ain't necessarily so, but that's how people are going to look at it. And how Isaiah will talk about it. And he talks about eunuchs who will say, and you know what a eunuch is, right? That the eunuchs will say, I am a dry tree. I can't have children. But Jehovah says to the eunuchs, no, you will have a place and children in my kingdom. See, the promise is not just for this life. And that's why with Abram and Sarah, he's 100 years old and he still believes he's going to have kids. Now, okay, that's a little more believable about guys. But when you have a woman who's 90 and has already gone through menopause, what are we going to see Sarah do in the next couple of chapters?
Wow.
She's going to laugh. Now, you have to remember that in the chapter before Sarah laughs, Abraham laughs first. Okay? And Isaac, the promised child, is named Laughter. That's what Isaac means. So don't take the fact that Sarah laughs as a criticism. It's actually talking about the joy that they're going to feel because they get a kid. And you know how it is. I remember being so delighted when every one of my kids had a kid. And one for 20 years had one. But they got one. I mean, it's awesome. That's awesome. So all of these words are covenant language. Thank you. And when you see them, you need to think of the entire covenant, not just one little piece of it. You can't just partially keep the covenant, right?
Rebecca, I guess I don't remember East Wind. Yeah, the East Wind and Parent.
Okay, East Wind, let me see. No, it isn't up. These are not across from each other. Okay, I tried to say that at the first. These are just random order.
Sorry.
Okay, just random order. East wind means a wind that is coming across Iran and Iraq and hitting you, which is a description of the Assyrians and the Babylonians coming to attack you. It's also just an awful east wind that dries out everything and probably is bringing grasshoppers with it. Did you see those pictures a year or so ago of all of the crickets in Nevada? They were like carpeting the place and the roads, and yeah. A few more. I'm worried because see that one at the bottom there on the left? So what has our state president asked us to do? Go home and think about how are you doing on keeping your covenants. And my guess is that we probably didn't think first about setting prisoners free.
yet that's an important part of this. You'll see this language all the way through the New Testament, and in the book of Isaiah in particular. Obviously, you can see how much of it is temple language. You've got your sword versus the plowshare. Remember, metal was so scarce that at the time of Saul and David, only 2 people in the entire Israelite army had iron swords. That was Saul and his son, Jonathan. That's it. Everybody else is using bronze, which doesn't keep as good an edge, or wood when they go into battle. And when you did get a chunk of iron, you would take it to a blacksmith and have him hammer it into a sword when war is coming
To protect your family. But when the war is over, you take that same piece of metal back to the blacksmith and he hammers it into the plowshare, the tip of your plow, because an iron-tipped plow can dig deeper than just the wood, and you'll get more crops. And so when you have Amos and Isaiah talking about hammering your swords into plowshares, that means peace is coming. If you're hammering your plowshares into swords, yeah, war is coming. Thankfully, there's a lot more good ones. Okay? We're not done yet. I will send you this list.
Yeah.
And hopefully, as you read, you'll begin to pay more attention when these words show up as to what the prophet or individual is actually saying and talking about. Okay, next PowerPoint. Okay, we can close that one down and close that one down. Now, we're going to talk about chapter 16, which is a difficult chapter. It's the introduction of Hagar. And in apocryphal texts, in pseudepigrapha, in the Hadith, that's the writings of the Muslims. It's very similar to Midrash among the Jews, which are made up stories, right? Hagar has 3 different identities. One is her original identity as an Egyptian princess who is given to Abram and Sarai after that misunderstanding in Egypt about whose sister or wife she is, right? That the tradition is that she's an Egyptian princess given to them to be a handmaiden to Sarai. So that's the central position there. And then, as she gets older, she, of course, is one of the wives of Abraham and the mother of Ishmael. But what people don't know, and I don't think anybody is paying attention to this, Hagar is, and Hajira is the Arabic pronunciation. It's not a name. It's a title. In Hebrew, ha is the definite article, the. Okay? When God creates the heavens and the earth, it's ha'eretz and hashamayim. So ha is the. Hagar is the foreigner. or stranger in the land. So for the first 10 chapters, where Hagar is a character in this story, she has no name. This is like, you know, that black woman who worked in your house, or the Hispanic who does your lawn. It's objectification, someone as other, and that's how she's known. You know, she's a slave, but she's the foreign one. So the whole story is starting to look like she's not treated really well. At the same time, we find out that Sarah is barren. And this is, I think, a very interesting sculpture that was done to show Sarah, with an empty womb. And yet, she and Abram have been promised that they will have children, right? And so Sarai, this is the first of a whole series. And if you haven't noticed this, there's a whole series of women known as the matriarchs who make things happen. If they don't have a kid, they're going to go and buy some mandrakes. Or they don't like who the local girls are, they're going to find a wife for their son somewhere else. Or they don't like the decision their husband has made, so they're going to do it on their own. This sets up the women as being headstrong and taking matters into their own hands and not sitting back and being submissive to God like they're supposed to be. Well, depends on how you want to read the story. But you will see very different views of women in these passages. And women who step out of the socially acceptable role aren't going to have great things said about them. Then again, how's their life? Right? If they've been pigeonholed into something where their only value, in this case, is if they have a son. Otherwise, they have no value. That's Sarah. And so, she decides to come up with an idea, and that is surrogacy. Now, they didn't use that word, but it's around us now and fairly common that people will have a surrogate carry a child for them. Maybe in your own families. The question is, was this Hagar's idea? Was this Sarah's idea? Was it God's idea? Is Sarah just coming up with this on her own? I think it's interesting that in Doctrine and Covenants 132, which is not one of my favorite sections, God says, I commanded Abraham to take Hagar to wife. So if you want to dump all this blame on Sarah, which lots of people are going to do, we'll read some passages, God says, this was my decision. I made this happen. So Sarai says to Abram, and this is before their names are changed in chapter 17, behold, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. The idea through all of the Old and New Testament is that God holds the key to childbearing. And that he decides who has kids and who doesn't. And because he has that power, if you don't have kids, you must have done something wrong. And that idea continues even into our day. But it ain't necessarily so, right? We know now that it's not that God necessarily has cursed you. It may be that something has gone wrong in your endocrine system or in the way you were born as a child. And you have to decide whether God causes all those malformations or if God allows them to happen in mortality. You got some real theological conundrums if you believe God causes all the problems in our lives. Yeah, think about it. But that's the idea at the time. So, Abram, go in unto my maid, that I may obtain children by her. Now, to obtain children by her is a pretty bad translation of what the Hebrew actually says. The Hebrew says that I may be built up in her. And we talked about the word to build, bana, and how derivatives of that word are son, ben, daughter, Beth, house, Beth, Bait, and family. The first use of it is Noah and all his house went on the ark. So it's a metaphor here of building your house, your family, out of living stones, that's boys, and the thing that you build is a house, that's girls, in Hebrew. So when you get to Peter and he's talking about building a house on a foundation of apostles and prophets, and it is the temple, built out of living stones, he's quoting an idiom that has been used by his time for thousands of years. That I may be built up in her. And Abram listened to the voice of his wife. That's a good idea, brethren. Just saying. So, the problem is, what's the effect of this in the lives of Sarah and Hagar? And we have a real tendency to just slide right over it and not really talk about how the women feel in the story. Now, Amy Easton Flake, who, I don't even know if she's still there, she was a BYU professor of religion, wrote an article that was at the 50th Sperry Symposium talking about the covenant of compassion, caring for marginalized and the disadvantaged in the Old Testament. Boy, does that have resonance today. She wrote an article entitled Recognizing Responsibility and Standing with Victims, looking at the women of the Old Testament. So here's some quotations from this article that she has written. Now, this is not something you normally hear like in Relief Society or General Conference, okay? But this is an approach by a BYU professor in print in the Sperry Symposium sponsored by BYU. So it may require that you change how you think about messages we are receiving. So, a womanist theologian, now let me define some terms here. I'm sure you know feminist means elevating the position of women, right? A womanist is a feminist from an oppressed culture, such as African Americans or Hispanics or strangers in the land. Hagar, okay? There's a womanist theologian, Dolores Williams, and she says this. And again, this is quoted by Amy Easton Flick. God's response to Hagar and her child's situation, and you know what happens. Hagar seems to be lording it over, that she's pregnant and Sarah isn't. And Sarah has had it up to here. And she kicks her out. She's her slave. She has the right to do that. Hagar and the child's situation was survival. And involvement in their developments of an appropriate quality of life that is appropriate to their situation and their heritage. Williams argues that recognizing how God is at work in the survival and the quality of life struggles of many families, other people like Hagar with her unborn child, is equally important in seeing God at work in liberating individuals and communities. Since it is unlikely that racism, sexism, and economic exploitation will disappear anytime in the near future, isn't that a terrible statement we have to agree with? Our theology needs to have room for God to be at work supporting and caring about those who are oppressed within those structures from which there is no apparent escape. God is present and at work in the struggles for survival, and to some degree, the quality of life within all of the brokenness of this world. God helps people make a way out of no way. And it was our experience going on our mission as humanitarian workers that we began to see ways that God was acting in the lives of oppressed people in the world. And the billions of dollars that your free will donations are enabling the church to spend to change the lives of people. Can we end, for example, one of our projects? The Elders Quorum in Milan wanted to rescue girls who were being forced into prostitution by the mafia. I'm sorry to say that the church said, no, we're not going head to head with the mafia. So there are some structures of oppression that maybe we're not sending our young Elders Quorum members out to fight right now. But how do we fight that oppression? Here's another quotation. The relationship between Hagar and Sarah is troubled. And if you don't want to discuss that trouble, well, probably it's not discussed in most Sunday school classes. We instead choose to focus on the blessings of the covenant, right? That's easier. It's troubled and is not a relationship to be emulated. But the preservation of the story of their relationship has enormous value to contemporary readers because it asks us to confront and honestly evaluate how we are treating those who are in any way socially or economically less advantaged than we are. Had a conversation about white privilege lately? If not, this story calls you to that. Relating this story to contemporary women, Lynn Japinga, a professor of religion, wrote, "One of the painful realities of the feminist movement," and if you think about who started the feminist movement back in the 1960s, right? Every one of the famous feminists in the early movement were wealthy white women, right? They were doing just fine, but they didn't like the fact they couldn't get a credit card. They didn't like the fact they couldn't rent their own apartment or open a bank account in their own name. I mean, some of you are old enough that you remember that's how it was. One of the painful realities of the feminist movement is that while middle-class white women recognized their own oppression, they did not always recognize the way that they themselves oppressed women of other classes or ethnic groups. Middle-class white women hired African American or Hispanic women as domestics, still do, at times without providing adequate pay or respect. Too often we recognize our own marginalization, our own difficulties, sorrows, and oppression, without recognizing how we directly and indirectly contribute to the marginalization, difficulties, sorrows, and oppressions of others. Do you see how this text ties into our stake president saying, go home and think about why we don't have rain? Are we keeping our covenant to set the prisoners free? Last one. Sorry, this is a little heavy, but you can't talk about Sarah and Hagar without going here, right? A careful reading of Sarah and Hagar's relationship, and this is Amy Easton Flake's words, obliges us to assess the ways that our privilege shapes our relationship and actions. It requires us to grapple with how we may responsibly and equitably deal with power and privilege. It urges us to consider how we contribute to the exploitation of others. What do you buy? What do you not buy? How we interact with individuals of a different ethnic group or economic class. What we will do to ensure that as we work toward our own good, we do not do so at the expense of others, especially those whose position in society is more marginal than our own. Reading with Sarah and Hagar, we cannot help but feel the relevancy of their story for today. Renita Weems, who teaches at the American Baptist College, says, theirs is a story of ethnic prejudice, exacerbated by economic and sexual exploitation. Did anybody ask Hagar? Did she have any choice in this story? Did her dad ask if she wanted to be a slave when he gave her to Abram and Sarah? Their story is a story of conflict, women betraying women, mothers conspiring against other mothers. Theirs is a story of social rivalry. And I know within my life, there's this conflict between working mothers. Well, what does that mean? Every mother is a working mother, right? And yet, women would make other women feel bad about the choice they made. See, you're not doing much to help the world if you drop out of college and don't have a money-making career, and instead just stay home with the kids. That's exactly what one of my children's teachers said to me one day. She says, "You're clearly a capable person. Why are you not a professional?" And I said, "Well, I am." She says, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Seen my kids? You like my kids?" She says, "Well, sure. That's what I do." But women are not kind to other women. And allow women the freedom to make decisions about their own lives. She continues, Amy Easton Blake does. Consequently, if we are willing to read authentically and openly with Sarah and Hagar and create a space where the Holy Spirit might teach us, then the text will call us up short. And it will help us to recognize the various ways in which we are complicit in the oppressing of others, and it will inspire us to work more in solidarity one with another. How much support do we give to single moms? Do we help young mothers who have 4 kids under the age of 6? What are we doing to help individuals from our positions of power to have richer lives? And I think that's what the story is of Hagar and Sarah. Now, we're going to watch both of them become the matriarch over amazing families. So both end up in positions of power and privilege. But at this moment, there's some issues that call us to reflect. It's my testimony that there is much that we, and by that I mean the descendants of Joseph, the birthright son, Ephraim and Manasseh, who have more advantages than the vast majority of the rest of the world, we have the opportunity to decide how are we going to use our birthright, our double portion. Build a bigger house, or start a business and turn it over to the employees. There are options of how we can set economic, social, and ethnic prisoners free. And we need to consider them if we want any rain. I leave that with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so we got to slide 4 of the 112 in that.